Welcome to the Derm Club podcast. Today we have a very, very special guest. Many of you might recognize his name, Dr. Jerad Gardner today, and he will be talking to us about the one and only dermpath. So I want to introduce you, Dr. Jerad Gardner. As any rising dermatologist can tell you, we are all required to gain some mastery in dermatopathology. Along that journey, it is nearly impossible not to stumble upon Dr. Jerad Gardner's YouTube videos that focus on educating and inspiring a love for dermatopathology. Normally, dermatopathologists are behind their microscopes with limited patient interaction. Today, we have the pleasure of chatting with Dr. Gardner, a dermatopathologist from Geisinger Medical Center in Danville, Pennsylvania, who has taken the opposite approach. And he actually uses his large social media presence to inspire other doctors and to educate patients. Dr. Gardner has a love for soft tissue and bone pathology. This is clearly evident from the videos he has created in the past decade that he shares with us on YouTube. He now has over 40,000 followers on YouTube, over 32,000 followers on Twitter, and 34,000 followers on Instagram. He is also the author of the Survival Guide to Dermatopathology, as well as the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Archive Path. Dr. Gardner, it is a pleasure to have you on today. I feel like I already know you because I've spent so much time watching you and rewatching you to try to master dermatopathology on YouTube. And I really feel like I'm speaking to a star.
Thank you for the very nice introduction and for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm just a regular guy who makes YouTube videos. That's all.
So what was it like starting off on YouTube, and what was your initial inspiration to, take it public?
Well, I guess it was probably not very exciting just because it was a kind of a non-event. I just did this. I always had wanted to do some teaching. I mean, I like doing teaching in person way before social media. Even when I was a resident, I'd teach the junior residents and med students. I always really enjoyed that. And then I thought, well, it'd be kind of cool if there were like videos about some of these things. And I was writing, I think, a book chapter about desmoid fibromatosis, and decided I'd make a video to accompany the book chapter and have like a little link to it in the text. And I thought that'd be kind of cool and savvy and new school or something like that. I don't know. And so I made that, and I made a couple other videos that year. I think that was 2012. Yeah, 2012. And man, it was a lot of work. I tried to make it like real perfect and added little pop-up boxes that said the things, little key points. I mean, and I kind of gave up on it because I talk fast, I stumble over my words. And so I tried to like edit every out, and I was just like, I forget this, it's too much work. So I kind of put it to the side and gave up on it for a few years. And then like 2016, one of my med students, Mickey Lindsay, who's now actually a pathology resident at University of Arkansas for medical sciences and is going to be a dermpath fellow in a couple of years too. She was a first year med student coming into like my module on skin and bone and soft tissue for the second year med school. And she said, please make a skin histology video. And I've been thinking about it. And I said, okay, fine, Mickey, I'll do it. So if it wouldn't have been for Mickey, so I've told her this, and I said she can put it on her CV if she wants. I was like, you're the one who really like made me like really get into this. So I made that video, and I just kind of made it raw, and another med student spliced it together because I didn't even know how to do basic editing on videos. And I put it out there, and like all these people started watching it, and the med students were like, this should be required. And I was just like, it was just a video about like, here's what normal skin is. But there's not always access to that kind of stuff explained in that way, I guess. And so that's what made me realize there was kind of an interest or a need for certain types of teaching online. And there are other people who do that, but there are not a lot of other people. I'm thankful that number is growing now. So I just started making more videos, and I had other fellows and residents like Ed Fulton's another one who really inspired me during his year as a fellow. He was like, hey, can we make a video? And he would come in early and pull slides, and we'd sit at like 7 a.m. on Tuesday before we started cases, and we would just like make a video. Sometimes he'd pull hard stuff that I was like, oh, Ed, I don't have vasculitis. That's a hard, and I'd have to go do reading to make sure I didn't mess it up too bad. And I got all the details, but it was really some of my trainees who really pushed me to get over that, that kind of barrier to actually start making content. And then once people started watching it and telling me it really helped them, that's, kept me going. So, And then, so I did not anticipate that I would be having a podcast interview about what my YouTube channel is doing in 2021. Like that was not at all what I imagined would happen when I started. It just kind of happened organically.
You never know where something's going to take
No, you
right?
don't. And it's always those people around you. I really have found that in every part of my life, is that those people around you that really make it all happen. I certainly never pulled myself up by my bootstraps. It was always a whole bunch of people around me, giving me a lot of help along the way that made all the difference in the world. I'm super thankful for that.
I am too, because if it weren't for you, I wouldn't understand half of those dermatopathology slides I see.
I'm so glad that it helps.
So thank you.
Yeah.
And I know many other residents feel the same way, and med students included. Did you ever think that, like, you put this amazing free resource together? Have you ever thought that maybe it shouldn't be free and you might want to make it some sort of subscription for people to pay?
Sure. People have brought that up over the years. And I went back and forth with the idea, like it's great to make some money, right? I still owe a bunch of money on student loans. I'm finally starting to pay those down, but still I'm coming up on my 10th year in practice. I still owe 6 figures of medical school debt. So, but in any case, I've thought about that, but in the end, I thought it would be fine to make some extra income on it, but I really don't want to do it at the expense of it being freely available to everyone. So, and especially that's important to me because of people in lower resource areas in the developing world, people who still have to take care of patients, but don't have anywhere near the funds that are available at our fingertips. And that's one of the benefits really of social media for me, is that I've had the ability to meet people all over the world, not just, get followers. Followers are just number, right? Just the number itself it's a great metric. It's fun to, impress people and say, look how many followers I have, but they're all individual people, right? And it's getting to know those people and those interactions that to me is the real richness and the wonderful aspect of social media. Despite the plenty of bad things that come with social media, the really good thing is that you meet all these cool people who you never would have met in real life. And I've met people from so many countries, and many of them have said, you're the only way that we learn dermpath, or there's no one in our country that knows about sarcomas or whatever. And obviously that's not true of many countries. Do have plenty of resources locally, but there's a lot of countries and a lot of places in the world where people don't. And where even like $25 would be a lot of money to ask of someone, let alone the, hundreds of dollars to even thousands of dollars we charge for courses in the United States. And so I just thought, I just don't want to do that. I mean, I've done some courses before for companies that were like behind paywalls, but in general, I wanted to make the bulk of my content free. So I did decide about a year and a half or so ago that I would start allowing YouTube to run ads on my videos, which is like maybe a minor annoyance to people, but I get to make a little extra income that basically is enough to partially go towards my daughter's college fund. So, I'm never going to retire on
three
YouTube
daughters,
or anything like that. I do. I have 3 daughters, right? So it will not even fund, I'm sure, their expenses, but it's okay. It's a little something. Maybe when I'm in retirement, maybe it'll get up to a place of having a little bit of passive income, stream every month in addition to retirement. But I mean, I'm never going to quit my day job and make enough money as a YouTube. If I wanted to do that, I'd be making videos about like makeup or unboxing Disney toys or something. Those are the videos, like the stuff my kids watch, like when they're like, all my daughters want to be YouTubers, and it's not because they want to grow up and be like dad. They're like, Dad, no, we mean like real YouTubers, and I'm like, so yeah, like the ones with the golden play buttons and stuff. Yeah, not me.
Thank you for the amazing things you do for the public. So can you tell me a little bit about how you choose what topics to cover in your videos, and how do you find inspiration for the next ones? I mean, did you start I understand you started with one topic, but did you go back and say, okay, first I want to cover the basics and then kind of build upon that?
Well, that would have probably been a smarter approach, to have like a totally structured curriculum from the start, but I really did it kind of in a more organic way. I knew like basic histology I wanted to cover with skin, because I think that's a question that like everybody sits down on the microscope, med student or even junior residents, like, you just don't learn, you don't really grasp skin. And even if you did well in histology in med school, it's a little different, like learning from pictures and the, diagrams, to actually sitting down and seeing a slide and figuring out what's actually going on. Like, what are you looking at? Where are you in the body? Is this normal? Is this not normal? And that's really the foundation to doing dermpath. You have to know what normal is. That's the foundation to all of pathology. You got to know what normal is to figure out what's abnormal and what is it and does it matter for the patient and how do we handle it? So I wanted to cover basics like that and other basic things like basal cell carcinoma and actinic keratosis, but I'm also really interested in rare diseases and rare tumors, particularly sarcomas. And that's a niche area that there are not a lot of pathologists in the whole world. The number of people that do sarcoma pathology is pretty small, I mean, compared to other specialties in medicine. And so I thought, even though those videos may not be of interest to the vast majority of people, for the people out there who are making the diagnosis of sarcoma or for the patients who are getting that diagnosis, it actually matters a great deal for that small group of people. So I thought I want to share that like kind of high level expertise that I have from working with, I trained with Sharon Weiss and Mark Edgar, two incredible soft tissue pathologists. And I wanted to be able to pass on some of that knowledge and the knowledge I've gained in practice over the years, but I also wanted to continue to cover basics. So I did spend a lot of time covering different entities that I like and that I feel comfortable with and I know about. Also ones that I have a lot of examples in my collection because, you have to have good content to make a video. There's some things I'd like to cover, but I don't have any, or I've never seen one in real life yet, So that's one thing. And then sometimes I'll do videos that people request. Like they'll say, oh, I think you should do a video on this. And I'm like, well, that's a good idea. And then other times people request videos and I'm like, no, I've not made a video about that yet because it's really hard. Like alopecia, plenty of people have said, please do an alopecia video. And I'm like, sorry, no, it's really, really complicated. I still struggle with it a lot, even after almost a decade in practice. And as I know, you've told me that you've done a fellowship with in hair loss, right? And so you understand it's complicated clinically. The pathology of it is very nuanced and complicated, even for a dermatopathologist. I think many of us in dermpath find it a challenging area. So some things like that, I'm like, I just don't feel qualified to really do it, So those are some aspects. And then the pandemic changed things for me actually, I mean, there was silver lining of it was that everyone started doing video lectures, right? So all these lectures I used to do in person, now everyone had the setup and the ability to do them virtually. And so I just started doing screen recordings of all the lectures I gave. And that created an enormous amount of content because I give a lot of lectures for my own trainees and also invited talks at, other universities and programs. And so I would put together unknown cases or give talks about certain topics, whatever the situation was. And then I'd record that. And then later I could edit that up and put it on YouTube, either as a compilation video or as individual segments about each entity. And I tend to do both now. I'll make a 1 hour compilation of 25 cases, and then I'll split that up later into 25 individual small entities. Because some people want to sit down and have a whole hour of let's talk about all this stuff back to back. And other people will never watch a 1 hour video. They want like bite-sized 5 minutes a day, videos. So making both styles seems to appeal to both different types of learners. And that's, I think, one of the beauties of YouTube is that you can teach people that are at the very basic level, starting skin histology, and you can at the same time have videos that are teaching people fellowship level dermpath and bone and soft tissue sarcoma pathology and everything in between. And you can have the content that's made in short little segments or in long 4-hour mega videos, and it can make it available to different learners and different learner styles. And I think that that's one of the great things about online teaching is that you can do that.
So you mentioned trainees. Have you been teaching your trainees, especially during the pandemic, via this lecture method on YouTube, or and do you think it makes things easier or harder than sitting at the microscope and learning it by sitting next to you?
That's a good question. I think there are some aspects of face-to-face learning at the microscope side by side that can never be replaced online, even live real-time lectures, because, we've all been in enough Zoom calls now to know people often leave their cameras off. People are a little bit less comfortable to, kind of interrupt or ask questions. When you're at the scope, you can really, you can see their face. You can kind of have the sense, the awareness of the comfort level, the level of understanding, and it's a little bit less comfortable in a virtual setting. I mean, I feel comfortable speaking and teaching in a virtual online setting, but I do feel like the back and forth interaction is not always as fluid and comfortable for people, especially in a big group setting. I think a lot of people feel more anxious about speaking up in a large group in a virtual environment, like on Zoom or I say Zoom, but any conferencing software. So yeah, but during the pandemic, especially during the early stages where we were really trying to avoid all interaction and stuff, and before the vaccine, we did do a lot of online teaching. And then what I currently do is I do at the scope teaching, we're masked and stuff, of course. And then We also do for larger groups, I do virtual lectures, but when I'm with 1 or 2 or 3, trainees, we'll sit at the scope. If it's a larger lecture, like a scheduled lecture, I do it virtually via Zoom or Teams and then record it. And then, if you've watched YouTube videos on mine, you've probably seen many of those videos that I've done with my residents. And then the other thing is that I do use all of the content that I have online to reference back to when I'm with the trainee. I'll explain, here's the basics of this entity. And I have a whole long video if you want to go watch it later. Sometimes I'll text them the link. They're probably like sick of it. Like, no, we know you got the video. Stop telling us to watch them. But what I like about that is it makes me a more efficient teacher, right? I can sit down, we can have let's talk about the main details of this. If they really want to dive deeper, that video is there for them later at whatever time, whether it's later that night or 5 years from now when they encounter a case in real life and need to know, like, how do I diagnose myxofibrosarcoma? What did Jerad say about this? I don't remember. Then go watch that video and it's right there. But they can dive into it if they want or not, whenever they want. So I like that, I can make that available to them as a resource to look at later if they need it. And at the same time, that same resource is available to people all over the world. So I found that that's one of the real benefits is that you get to, it's like, get all of those layers of good stuff out of making videos.
Yeah, and it's really, I don't know about you, but in medical school, they've recorded lectures, and I often would go back and listen to them just to reinforce it. And it definitely helped me learn, and it helped it stick in my brain. So I think that's a huge benefit and an amazing resource that you offer.
So I trained Dr. Kopelman in the years before video recorded lectures were thing. So I went to medical school. I guess it does seem long ago now, 2002 to 2006. That was, pre-social media, I got my first Gmail account when I was like about to be a senior in med school, and it was like invite only. And I had some buddies who did like IT work for like NASA and Lockheed Martin. And so they were like super like into the tech world, and they're like, we can get you a Gmail invite. And I was like, oh, so cool. And then like that was right before Hurricane Katrina happened. Our whole school got destroyed and flooded. And like back then, I remember like after the hurricane happened, we couldn't, our email servers were down because they were all in New Orleans and underwater, and the cell phone towers didn't work. If you had a New Orleans number, you couldn't really call anyone. And no, I didn't have anyone else's email. We just had school emails because, Gmail was just this new thing, and there wasn't really Facebook or Twitter. And like, so it was a couple of weeks before we figured out what was going on, which is unthinkable today. Like now, if it's been 30 minutes after a disaster and your family hasn't heard from you, they're dead. They have to be, there's no way they wouldn't have contacted us. So it's just like this. And that was, 15 years ago. And it was like a different world, right? That's why digital things have changed stuff so much. Really like a huge culture shift. So
definitely, especially after the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Did your colleagues think that you were a little bit crazy to be entering this like YouTube world?
Probably, but they probably thought I was a little bit crazy for a variety of reasons, and which is probably true. I mean, I'm loud and talkative and energetic, and I'm an atypical pathologist, right? I mean, I know many pathologists who are outgoing and enthusiastic. There's certainly the stereotype of pathologists being people who just, gaze at their shoes while they do autopsies is I'm sure there are some pathologists like that, but we're a very diverse group of people, and many people that are outgoing and talkative. Maybe not very many quite so much as me, but I mean, that's just how I'm wired. So in any case, yeah, I think some people thought it was either a little crazy or maybe a waste of time, but I'm thankful that I didn't really get hard pushback from really, almost no one. And I had supportive colleagues, and like my chair was supportive, and the people around me who were in charge could have been like, don't waste your time on this stuff. You need to write more papers. But I was writing a lot of papers, and I felt like I was in a university environment then, and now I'm kind of in a more hybrid academic environment where we have residents and fellows, and I'm an associate professor at our affiliated med school, but it's not like pure old school university academia. So in that environment, people could have said, yeah, you shouldn't be wasting your time on this. But instead, I had people that were supportive, and I worked really hard to leverage all the online stuff I was doing to, I wrote papers about, how to use social media to educate. And I used all of the online teaching to, I got people to evaluate me, and based on how my teaching skills were on YouTube. And I submitted that when I applied for promotion and tenure, actually. And I got over 1,000 responses in like 4 days. It was amazing. So that was extra leverage to show the promotion and tenure people, like, this is not a waste of time. A lot of people say this helps them. This is what our mission is in academia. Why should it matter that I'm using YouTube to do it, versus just in the classroom? I was still giving classroom lectures and doing all the traditional stuff. So I feel like I hustled a little harder to make sure I was above and beyond on all of the traditional things, because I knew I'd get judged more. And if there was any area I fell short, they'd be like, wow, it's because he was wasting all that time on YouTube. So I felt like I had to kind of, prove myself more. And I always am looking for a fight or an argument maybe that's not there. My wife says I have oppositional defiant disorder. She's a psychiatrist, so she's probably right. Maybe I do have just a touch, but it's worked for me okay, because it's made me willing enough to push the boundaries a little bit. And I have her and other people to keep me from pushing them too far and going over the edge. So
it sounds like you were just a little bit ahead of the time before your other colleagues, and meanwhile it ended up working out just fine and really helpful for the public. So
in all honesty, I think there is a lot to be said about being in the right place at the right time. And if I would have done it, too much sooner, I don't know if there would have been as much of an audience, and it would have kind of just like fallen flat. Like initially I tried Twitter a little bit, and there just wasn't anyone really there in the pathology or derm space, or very few people. But then I got back into it at just the right time where there was enough people for it to start being interesting. And then more and more people kind of, came, and so it grew to a critical mass. And I think YouTube is the same way. If I would have made videos and no one watched them or responded, like I would have been like, 50 people have seen this in the past 2 years. Like, what am I wasting my time for? And so, really having that feedback and people telling you this is great, they watch it, is more than just having like your ego stroke. It's knowing that what you're doing is having a positive impact in the real world on real doctors taking care of real sick people, which to me, like, that's the whole point to do it in the first place, right? Is because it's going to actually help
so
people.
Gratifying.
People. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what keeps you going.
How do you perceive the role of each of these different platforms? You mentioned Twitter, and then there's YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. I could go on. I mean, there's TikTok. I don't know if you're on TikTok.
I am. I have like one video. It's like a spindle cell melanoma with Britney Spears Toxic playing over it. I think my kids are like, Dad, no, this is not how it works. I'm intrigued by TikTok, and I see people like Declog Comflecken, who's just like a legend of making like medical comedy, and he's an ophthalmologist. If you're watching this or hearing this and you've not, Declog Comflecken, he's like the funniest dude in the world. And also, for the record, he gave an awesome shout out to pathologists, and he made a video about us and about how we're like the greatest, nicest specialty. Mm-hmm. And he also, I think, has said before, like whenever I think he said something to the effect of, whenever I'm really feeling down, I go over to pathology Twitter, and it's like such a happy place, and everyone's so friendly and nice, and it's just like soothing. And I was like, see, we're winning. So I feel like Twitter is cool because it's public. It's really interactive. It's quick back and forth. You also, because it's public, you meet a lot of people outside of your normal sphere. And so that's really cool because you have all these cool connections with people you would never have maybe met in real life or on some other platforms like Facebook, which is also interactive. But most people do not friend people on Facebook that they don't know in real life. I'm a little bit of an exception because I've met a lot of people online. So I'm comfortable connecting to people who I've interacted with online. But I would say that I'm very unusual in that way, and that many people are much more private than that. And so I think that, Facebook is great. It's a little bit more intimate. There are also these private groups on Facebook, which is a growing aspect of what Facebook is the group setting, and groups are really powerful. And I love Facebook, particularly for the groups, because I've interacted with rare cancer patients. They have patient support groups, and I've been volunteering in a handful of those for diseases like angiosarcoma and dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans and others. For like 6 or so years now. And that's just been life-changing to meet those patients and really hear their stories and be able to help in some little way to help them understand their disease and to learn from them about their disease. So I gave a TED talk about that in 2020. If you look up my name and TEDx on Google, it'll come up on the TED Talk channel if for anyone who's interested. But so that's one thing about Facebook. Twitter, again, is real interactive and public. And I think it helps build actually the kind of brand, not just of you as an individual, but of your specialty. Like all of the pathologists on Twitter, talking about rare diseases and about how much we care about doing it right and getting it right, and having other specialties and the public see that. That's a good thing, I think, for our very behind the scenes, often misunderstood specialty. And so I think that's a nice benefit of it. I think Instagram's great because it's all image based. And I feel like there's a kind of a different culture there. There's a little bit of a younger audience. I think there's a real role for Insta. And also I think with TikTok, for being an inspiration to younger people who are coming into medicine, maybe high schoolers going into college thinking about pre-med. I've actually met some people who were pre-med who went on to be in med school and are applying for residency now. And I met them originally on Instagram. And so I feel like there's a way to have a positive influence and maybe sort of a recruitment sort of angle for people, not only for individual fields of medicine, but just for all of STEM type careers in general, for people to see there's all these cool, fascinating science-based careers out there. And maybe that's something that they would like to do in the future. So I think that those are all kind of different angles of the ways that I use those platforms. And I think that's the cool thing is that there's new platforms and there will be new ones developed in 2 or 5 or 10 years. And that there's plenty of space for, if you're watching this and you think, oh, well, I can't do anything. There's already someone who's dominated Twitter or YouTube or whatever. There's always a new angle, a new space to be carved out, a new way to use these things to solve problems that no one's thought of yet. And you might be the person to think of that. So go out there and do it, try something new and be the person to carve out that space and find a way to do something positive with social media. That's my advice.
You're very inspiring, and you obviously have a very good understanding of these platforms. So when I can imagine that other physicians approach you, or even non-physicians, and they ask you for tips on how to use social media, and what role do you think doctors have or non-doctors have in using it?
Yeah, so that does happen a lot. So much so, in fact, so I started a web page for this where I basically made it kind of an FAQ of like, here's Jerad Gardner's like thoughts about how to use social media. And over time, I've answered questions and added to that. And it's if you just Google social media guide pathologist, it'll be the top hit on Google, top of page 1. And even though I started it out and called it for pathologists, I think really the principles there apply really to not only any part of medicine, but just any professional specialty. There's a lot of principles there that are applicable across the board with, just some little different tweaks here and there. So that goes through a lot of stuff about how to set up a Twitter account, how to what the different platforms are and how to use them, some of the ways to avoid, HIPAA violations or patient privacy and ethical violations, because people ask about that a lot. I've actually written co-authored 2 different, peer-reviewed papers about that, about how to avoid privacy or legal issues on social media. And then I've written 22 or 23 papers about social media or related to the use of social media. Out of 120 some papers I've published, about a fifth of them, almost a fifth, are based related to social media. So it's a big niche part of a big chunk of what I actually do in my professional career. And then I've given, a couple hundred and like 250 or so invited lectures, not counting my own med students and residents. And over 100 of those are about social media. It's like the main thing people want me to tell. They're like, that dermpath stuff's fine, but tell us about Twitter, please. So yeah, I've given there's a huge interest in that and demand for that kind of content. And even still, which I assumed eventually there won't be as much because everyone will know. I mean, eventually, your generation will, and I'm not trying to talk to you, but I mean, down to you. I just mean you are younger, and the generation of people that are younger coming up who are digital natives, right? Who have grown up in a world that have never not known that you can't touch every screen, right? Like my kids, they'd start touching my computer. I'm like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. Because they've had, like iPads and stuff since they were babies. Like my 8-year-old, she was like 1.5. She ordered like a twin stroller on her Kindle, like, cause we had one order turned on and it showed up at our house. And I was like, I asked my wife, did you order this stroller? She's like, no. And then we looked, it was right there on the Kindle. She just saw it and was like, bye. No, she couldn't like really talk much yet. And she was, able to manipulate a device and make an order without being taught how. And it's a funny story. And thankfully we were able to return that and get our money back. It was a pain in the butt because I had to box the whole thing up and take it to, one of those office stores. And in any case, it really stands out to me because that was the point I realized there is this real difference in people like me who grew up going to libraries to get information in the small town I lived in because there was no internet. There was no, and I was born in 1982. So, I mean, I'm relatively old, but not as old as some people. I'm right on like the edge of millennial. age group. But I still remember a time where you couldn't get everything at your fingertips. And I didn't have like my own computer till I was, in med school, really. And so my kids are growing up in a world that is entirely different from that. And so the way that they will interact with social media and the way they will use that is going to be very, very different. It's very, very different than all the ways I envision. And I think that's true, not just of them, but that entire generation. And that's one thing I'm preaching maybe more than you were planning on. Sorry, you just got me off on a topic that's, really a passion. So the thing about that is, I think that, we have to be ready for that as medical educators. And that's one of the things I talk to other medical educators about, is that we have to make sure that our trainees know how to do this the right way and not get themselves into trouble that's going to harm their career, or trouble that's going to harm or violate the rights or privacy of patients. That's critical and crucial. But how can we teach them or lecture them if we don't know how to do it ourselves? If we've not educated ourselves, and you can't just read a book about it, you got to actually be in that environment and see how it works, And so I think that's actually really important, and that we can't just, pretend that that's not like a real thing. We have to find a way to actually harness the good from it, avoid the bad, and really train the next generation of doctors, because they're going to be the future of medicine. And we have to find a way to teach and interact with them that works with the way that they learn and intake information. Whether that was the way they did it back when I was a kid, it doesn't matter, right? We gotta work with the next generation the way they learn. So
yeah, you have to keep up with the time.
Yeah.
You mentioned
someone will throw that in my face one day. I'm sure they'll be like, you said on this video with Dr. Kopelman on her podcast in 2022. So I'm sure this will happen.
It will go down in history. You mentioned that, there are legal issues, ethical issues that doctors have to be careful about when using Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook, or other social media platforms. Can you summarize your advice for anyone who's looking to go on YouTube or any of these platforms to give information out?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I said, there are those two papers. If you look up Crane, C-R-A-N-E, and Gardner and social media ethics, that'll come up. And the other one was written with Tim Allen and myself, and it's called Keep Calm and Tweet On. And that's in Archives of Pathology. And those will give real in-depth answers. But the simple answers, number one, don't be a jerk. Like, don't be mean to people and say nasty stuff. It doesn't matter if your account's private or not. That should be common sense that you learned like from your parents when you were a kid, right? It's going to blow up in your face even more so when you do it online, especially if you're in the wrong, because it's going to be permanently preserved and everyone's going to like have mob mentality and beat you up for it. And you're going to just come out of it looking terrible. So be nice. When there's a real hot debate topic going on that just like dropped and it just got tweeted about, maybe step back a minute before you cast the stones of judgment, because the whole story may not be known to everybody yet. And you may say things that you really feel strongly about, and then later realize, well, it's actually not quite that way once everything's fleshed out more. So I feel like the more controversial something is, and I'm not saying to not take a stand. There are things we should definitely take stands on, but I think it's really important to know what your stand is and what the situation is. If you're going to comment it under your name publicly, you really have to think about that and be very thoughtful about that. And also sometimes the very best intentions of things that are totally right in what you stand behind, it may backfire and not actually help the situation. So you do have to think about like what's actually going to be helpful. And I don't know that there's one right answer for that. As far as like the legal stuff, the main things are don't ever disclose patient identifiers. It's the same rules that go in the hospital hallways or the elevators. It's just that online, there's a much bigger audience. And if you make a mistake there, it's going to be amplified much more quickly. So you don't ever, and if you're not familiar with what the HIPAA identifiers are, if you're in the United States, these apply to you. These are the legal rules of what are identifying features. Go and read them. Just look up the HIPAA identifiers. I think there's 18 of them total. And some of them are common sense, like, facially identifiable photographs, but other ones are things that you might not think of, like a date of service. So I don't say today I saw an example of blank. Now, no one would know if I said today I saw a basal cell carcinoma, because every day I see basal cell carcinomas, many of them. And but the point is that I don't ever want to tie data service with any individual picture or scenario that I'm sharing. I always edit the details and make up the history. That's why I'm always tweeting about a 30-year-old or a 50-year-old, because I don't know. I can't even remember. Those pictures are all from my archive. So I make up a general clinical story that fits with that tumor or that disease that's good for education, but protects the patient's privacy. It kind of further obscures it even beyond what what HIPAA requires. And then what was the other thing? And then also I guess for advice, do be careful. Some people put disclaimers in their Twitter, bios, and I did that for a little while. And then I just decided I would rather actually, instead of trying to think that some little online, disclaimer made by me is going to protect me legally, I just actually want to be careful about the way I word all of my comments. So if there's things that are like, look like high risks, scenarios, like someone like, is this a melanoma? And you're like, oh no, that's totally benign. That's probably dangerous, right? That's probably tricky because that's something that even experts struggle with when they're looking with their eyes, not over a computer monitor, and, or a phone screen. So there are things like that. There are also ways that you can help people to understand without being like totally definitive. Sometimes people will show me pictures and I'll say, that the first thing I think of is this disease or that disease. And when I have this problem, sometimes I use this stain and that can help sort this out. So I can give information that's helpful without being like, oh, here's the diagnosis done, and being committal on it. You know what I mean? So I want to give information and help and teach, but I do want to, avoid sticking my neck way out there. But, I'm not aware of any pathologists that have been sued for or had legal trouble for anything on social media. And even other doctors, what we found in that paper that Dr. Allen and I did is that when we looked at the English speaking case law, and he's a lawyer too, he's an MD, JD. So it was great to write that with him. And he's a pathologist who's also a lawyer. And so we looked and we were not able to find, for as far as sharing medical photographs, any type of medical photograph that was de-identified and shared for the purpose of education. We were not able to find any example of legal problems for any doctors who were doing that. And that's not just pathology, but all of medicine. So if you're de-identifying and you're trying to be educational and you're not mocking patients, I mean, again, the common sense stuff, your chance of having a real serious problem is very low, I think. So that's kind of my basic advice is just follow those principles and you'll steer clear of 99.9% of the problems.
Do you think as YouTube and these other platforms on social media become the main channel for healthcare information delivery, are you concerned that there's going to be a lot of misinformation out there? And are you concerned about that?
Well, I mean, this already is, right? I mean, we've seen an enormous amount of misinformation that's come out during the pandemic, particularly. I mean, and it is disheartening to see that. I mean, I saw that to some extent before, but it's just so dramatic now that it's overwhelming. I think to most people, even to doctors and medical people. For us, it's like just soul crushing because it so goes against everything that we've worked for our whole careers. To the non-medical members of the public, I think for many of them, it's just so overwhelming that it desensitizes you to some extent. It makes you just think like, what is truth, right? It makes you just like throw up your hands and be like, what can we even believe? And I know I have lots of friends and family who feel that way, and I cannot blame them because it's hard to know, like you're hearing all these different voices saying different things, sometimes conflicting things. And, we know that science is nuanced and it changes over time, but that's a hard thing to understand for people that are not like heavily trained in science, I think, and not a matter of intelligence, just a matter of like being immersed in the scientific method and in the way we do things in medicine. So yeah, I think that there will be probably, unfortunately, more of that in our future, and I'm not sure what the answer is to that. I think it's actually a really hard problem. And I don't know that it's a problem that, Mark Zuckerberg's going to fix or that, Twitter can fix or each of these platforms. I think, a lot of times people want to put all the blame on them and say they should be fixing this, but I think it's actually much more complicated than that. And I heard something a long time ago that stuck with me that we're not going to be able to shout down or argue enough to make the people who are saying things that are lies or untruths about medicine or whatever. We're never going to be able to argue them into the ground, so everyone will be like, okay, you won, I'll believe you now and not them. There will always be people that want to believe what the people saying misinformation are saying. So arguing to some extent, there may be a time and a place for it, but I try to, in general, like avoid it. I had done it a little bit earlier in my career, and I feel like it generates a lot of anxiety and controversy, and I'm not sure that there's always great benefit there. Certainly not for me emotionally. And I'm not sure that it really helps other people as much. And it's like when two people are fighting in the mud, we both get really muddy. Right. So I think though that one thing I heard was that, when we just make sure that we are putting as much accurate, honest, truthful information out there, then hopefully that will help dilute out the misinformation. And I have seen that to some extent, even before COVID and stuff where, I was tweeting about how vaccines are safe and good. And, and do not cause autism and all these problems. And you know, I know that there were people that were even back then were like, you're crazy and you're paid off by big pharma. And I was like, I don't know where that check is, man, but I've been waiting for it. But then one of my friends who I knew when I was a kid said they were having a baby, and they knew some people that really were against vaccines, but other people said it was good. And they said, I've seen you make messages about this. Like, what are your thoughts? Someone who I hadn't seen for over a decade that had seen me talk about this and felt that the way I conducted myself was trustworthy, not that they wanted. And I don't know what they ended up deciding, but I thought if that's true, then maybe there are other people out there like that, where they are hearing and seeing the things. And I've had other comments that said, you know, I thought this or that was not really a legit thing, but after hearing you say that, you know, all the other stuff you do seems true and honest and trustworthy. So I believe that if you think that this is the real deal or this is legit, then it probably is. So I think there's something to be said for that to really conduct ourselves in a way that's as much as we can above reproach, in the hopes that we will be a trustworthy source of information, because we're not going to ever be able to stomp out the misinformation, right? As long as there's people that can get money and power or whatever it is they're after for saying misinformation, it's going to be there, and they will always find a way around whatever we put in place to try to stop them. So we can only get so worried about that. We just have to find a way, I think, to put good out there and hope that it reaches as many people as possible. So that's my approach.
Thank you for sharing that. Did you ever think about writing a book to go along with your YouTube videos?
Well, I mean, I did write a book. I don't know that I ever, it may have crossed my mind. There were some times I thought about writing some stuff, but I just thought, gosh, it's so hard. It's so much work. I don't know how to do this. And I would still be saying those same things if it weren't for Dr. Elizabeth Montgomery, who's a really famous pathologist in GI and soft tissue pathology. And I got to know her actually online. I'd been to her lectures before, and I'd been reading her, you know, papers and stuff since I was a trainee. So she's like a big deal. And then, you know, she got to be friends with me on Facebook, and one of her trainees is a friend of mine. And so we kind of got in touch that way. And she said, hey, I would love for you to write a dermpath book for this new publishing company we're starting called Innovative Science Press. And we're going to make this like series of like books that are aimed at beginners to kind of, you know, not like comprehensive text, but kind of like here's a survival guide. Read this and you'll hit the ground running on your first day of dermpath or whatever the rotation is, ready to go, understanding most of the main stuff. And I was like, how can I say no to Liz Montgomery? And I was so overwhelmed with projects at that point in my life. That was in 2017 or 18. It must have been 17. And I was like, I need another project. Like I need a hole in the head. And I was like, and this is like a big project. But she was like, well, you already have all these pictures you put online, so it won't be that hard, probably. True, but it was actually really way more work than I anticipated, partly because I'm compulsive. So I told her yes. And I mean, I was really just honored and incredibly flattered that someone of her stature would invite me to be this person to write a book. And then I got to co-author a book with her, which was also a huge honor, about a survival guide to soft tissue pathology. And in any case, so I decided to do it because it also really resonated with the kinds of teaching I like to do, right? I really like teaching basic stuff. I like teaching esoteric things too, but there's something really very satisfying about teaching the basics and seeing a beginner in the field really feel like, oh, I'm starting to get this. I think I can do this. And I think that like giving that sense of confidence is like such a gratifying thing to help someone realize, no, yeah, I can do this. I can make it. Because I think at first, sometimes, especially in fields like dermpath, where it's just like an overwhelming learning curve. All of pathology is that way. There's just so many diseases and so many patterns in your life. And then not to mention the stains and molecular, and you're like, it's impossible. I'll never, ever get this. And have someone like hold your hand a little bit and be like, yeah, look, just get this stuff down. And then you'll build on that and it's going to be okay. So I kind of took that angle from the book and I wrote it by myself, which was maybe a bad idea, but I thought this way I can say whatever I want. I don't have to worry about making any other co-author agree with it or happy. I can say, this is my way. You can throw this book in the trash if you don't like it, but I'm telling you, this is the way I do dermpath, the way I teach it, the way I do it for my own patients. So it's not perfect maybe, but it's good enough that I will use it on my patients, which to me is as close of a gold standard as I can have. Right. So yeah, I took a bunch of pictures and I wrote a book, and it took, I did not calculate the hours, but a solid year of like working on it, like every weekend, all day on Saturday, most of the day, Sunday, most mornings, and some nights. And, it was a lot of work, a labor of love, but I was really pleased with how it turned out. And I don't know if I'll write another book. It was a lot of work, but I'm really happy that I have written one now. Someone told me that when they asked them, do you like writing? And they were like, I like having written. I like the fact that I've written things in the past. The writing itself is sometimes a struggle, but yeah. So no, I did not plan that starting out, but I'm thankful that Liz gave me that push to do it, because I feel like it's a good thing now that I've done it. I'm really happy that I did it. So,
Do you have any exciting plans, career plans for the future that you can share with us?
well, that's, it's an interesting question. I've had like a, I don't know, not a midlife crisis, but I've had a couple of changes that happened right around the same time, like COVID, right? And then just before COVID happened, I decided to change jobs. My wife decided she's a child psychiatrist. She wanted to take some time off and spend some time home with our kids while they're younger, while they still, want to be around their parents. And then I decided that, we wanted to try a different place and a different type of job where I would have more time home with the family and be able to support my family better. So it kind of happened that she wanted to do that. We looked around. This job here at Geisinger had been open, and I had some friends who worked here who I really respect and admire, like Dr. Tammy Faringer, and who's a co-author of the book with Dirk Elston, which is like the staple dermpath book that all derm residents have. And so Tammy works right down the hall from me, and she's just fantastic. And so I contacted her, and she was like, "Oh, we would, yes, come and interview." And so that all worked out. And then just soon after that, COVID all happened, and I was worried they wouldn't hire me, but they said, "Oh no, don't worry, just come here anyway. Your job's totally fine." And it's just been an amazing place. But I kind of feel like it's been this awesome place where I have more time home with my family and my kids. I have more time to do teaching stuff. I feel a little bit less of a drive to, build my CV longer and publish a ton more papers. So now I really only want to publish stuff that's really fascinating to me. And otherwise, I don't want to just make my CV longer. Like I'm not at that phase anymore. So I honestly, in a way, feel like I'm kind of retired, and I'm 39, but I mean, I'm not really retired, but I feel like it's a
You're
different
settled.
mindset where I was like just hustling so hard to climb the ladder early on. And now I'm like, like I've climbed enough. Like I want to like do the stuff that really is meaningful and matters to me. And to me, that's my family and teaching and taking care of patients. And, so like, I just want to travel around the world and eat food and give lectures. I think that sounds like a pretty good career plan for, the rest of it, the whole way, I think. And I don't really see like fully retiring. I think I'd like to work until I'm not, physically or mentally able to, just, at a lesser pace and having lots of time off to travel. I love traveling, and I'm trying to take up some more hobbies. I've been working on, I've dabbled in Spanish for a long time, and I decided I'm going to get really serious. So I've been doing Duolingo, like hardcore, trying to get better at that. And then I decided to start practicing Arabic. So I've been studying that for about a year and a half, and it's such a beautiful language, and it is so difficult. It's so difficult, but it's really fun. And I've got a lot of Arabic speaking friends, so that's been fun. I'm going to try to, I've been dabbling in guitar for a long time. I'm going to try to get serious. I really like metal, and I want to learn how to play metal guitar. So that's my midlife crisis phase. I still don't drive a sports car. I have like a Honda Civic. So I figured this is a trade-off. Instead of buying a Ferrari, I'll play metal guitar. And I like to garden too. I've been growing tomatoes and vegetables. I've been experimenting with more gardening recently. So I don't know, it's boring old stuff that an old father does, I guess, but it suits me. It's good. I'm enjoying it. It's a different phase of my life. And I'm turning out more video content and more teaching material than I ever did before. Which to me, I feel like that's like really like what my calling is now. Is I feel like that's going to impact more people in the world probably than any paper I write or any, board membership or something else that I have. So I'd rather devote as much time to doing that. And when I'm not doing that, I want to be home with my wife and my kids having fun. So that's what the future looks like for me. And from this angle, it's looking great. I'm happy about it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gardner, for sharing your journey with us and for really sharing your talent of teaching dermpath. It's helped me, and it will continue to help me and many others for many generations to come. So we appreciate what you do, and keep it up.
I will. Don't worry.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Derm Club podcast. If you found the discussion today to be valuable, please subscribe and share. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode as we continue to delve into dermatology and skincare with the world experts.